Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's really a beautiful day, and we're so pleased to see all of you as we continue a series that began 22 years ago, the Brain Trust on Africa. And so to the distinguished members of the administration, the diplomatic corps, African government officials, speakers, friends, ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols observed. We tend to say that now to make sure we didn't overlook anyone. It's great to see you here this morning at our annual Brain Trust on Africa, entitled Africa Forging Ahead, meeting the Millennium Development Goals, justice and accountability, and the role of U.S. policy during the Congressional Black Caucus's 40th Annual Legislative Conference. I'm honored to serve as the honorary host of the Brain Trust during the ALC, as I have done for the past 22 years. And this year I'm also privileged to have been selected the chairperson of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And so this additional role will take me out for a few minutes as I have to tend to some other duties, but I will be here throughout the entirety of our Brain Trust. And so I certainly appreciate your continued support and interest in the continent of Africa. Many of you who are here today joined the Brain Trust and you know what you have in store. But for those who are joining us for the first time, let me welcome you. Every year we have a powerhouse set of speakers who share our insights on the most critical issues that confront Africa, and certainly this year is no different. This year we will introduce our illustrious speakers in a minute, but what is different about today's discussion is that we will shine a light on the progress that is taken in Africa and on the continent as we forge ahead. Many times the reason why we're taking this approach is to remind us that the efforts of so many people, many of you here in this room, have made a difference in Africa. Where we were 22 years ago as opposed to where we are today made a tremendous difference, and much of it is because of the advocates who are here today. So we all can and we do contribute to Africa's surge out of abject poverty, out of conflict, out of civil strife, away from human rights abuses, away from undereducation and pandemics. And we're going to focus on the brighter future, the fact that there has been a tremendous change. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the independence for 17 African nations, and we congratulate the people of those countries. Cameroon, 50 years ago, became independent, along with Mali and Senegal, Madagascar, Somalia, Benin, Niger, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Chad, Central Africa Republic, Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Gabon, Nigeria, and Mauritania. And so we celebrated these 17 countries becoming independent, and that was the beginning of the revolution that began. Of course, there were several countries that became independent a year or two before that, but that was the big breakthrough. So while we celebrate this milestone of 50 years of independence, let me remind us that African nations have been independent for less than 50 years, or just hitting the 50th year. And so let's take a look at us in 1812. We became independent in 1776, and so 50 years following that, I doubt very serious if much progress was made in this country, and so we have to put things in a proper perspective. 50 years of independence is not a long time, especially for so many years of domination under colonial and brutal rule from many of the European powers. We must never forget that independence was hard fought and was won by the courage and sacrifice of those freedom fighters who dared to envision a world in which they possessed the freedoms that were deliberately kept from them for a while they were under the domination. For nearly a century, their lands were under colonial rule, as we all know, that dismantled African communities and in many cases exacerbated the social and political inequities. We even asked why would people in Sierra Leone, and where did they get this terrible practice of cutting off limbs of their enemies. And of course, if you read the story about the Belgian Congo and King Leopold, it started with the Belgians trying to make sure that enslaved people did not try to escape. And so the Belgian authorities insisted that Africans mutilate one another. So that's where it began. It was wrong then, and it's certainly wrong now. But we ought to know the history. So we certainly have to know that there have been many changes. And there were many freedom fighters that made this change possible, and I certainly, too many to name, but let me just name 5. Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Patrice Lumumba of Democratic Republic of Congo, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and Steve Biko of South Africa are 5 of those freedom fighters who fought and changed the landscape of Africa. Many, many more we can name, but I just thought I'd throw out the name of a few. So let us remember the sacrifices of the thousands of people who lost their lives for freedom and that fought for self-determination and for their dignity. In the 50 years that we have followed the independence, the continent has made great progress. Particularly over the last decade, there has been a significant number of changes in the way that Africa is better off. For example, according to the World Bank in 2002, there were 16 countries in conflict, actual wars raging, just 8 years ago. Today remains only a few, and we'll hear about them today. We here in the United States support and encourage the continued development of good governance. That's one of our key premises of our policy. Good governance, strong economies, and open civil society, despite the obvious social, political, and economic challenges still facing the continent. We say things are much better. We know that they're certainly far from where they ought to be. So we must renew our commitment to support the people of all parts of Africa, to foster democracy and economic growth, and to alleviate poverty and disease, and to meet all 8 of the Millennium Challenge goals: to reduce poverty, hunger, maternal and child mortality, disease, inadequate shelter, gender inequality, and environmental degradation. And as you know, the Millennium Challenge goals are to be, our goal is 2015. And so we really have to speed up our programs. Today we will hear where Africans stand on meeting the goals, just ahead of the MDC Summit, which will be held in New York at the United Nations next week. We will grapple with achieving these goals in less than 5 years that remain. We will also deal with the ongoing conflicts in Sudan and Somalia, the Eastern DRC, Sudan's 21-year-old war between the North and the South wound down in 2005, only to be replaced by a genocide in Darfur. As we know, in the Sudanese North-South conflict, over 2 million people died. Over 4 million people were displaced. And we now can add over 400,000 people who have died in Darfur, and thousands, millions who have been displaced. So we still have work to do in those particular countries. Yet now, as the interim period established by the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which ended the North-South War, will soon come to a close on January the 9th of 2011. It seems that the National Congress Party of Sudan, headed by President Omar al-Bashir, is attempting to renege on the agreement that was made close to a decade ago. The referendum that was promised in the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, for the people of Southern Sudan and the people of Abyei to decide whether to remain a part of Sudan or secede, is at risk of not happening freely and fairly. Somalia's transitional federal government, the TFG, daily is struggling to hold on to control of its capital in Mogadishu, where Sheikh Sharif Sheikh Ahmed is struggling to keep his country from being overtaken by the terrorists in al-Shabaab, who is being supported by al-Qaeda. And the people of Somalia face continued attacks, and they are also experiencing severe poverty because of their isolation. I have traveled to eastern DRC, where the violence continues against women and children. They're caught in the middle, bearing the greatest of burdens. When I believe change, I do believe, though, that change will come to the DRC, as the Enough campaign now suggests the violence against women and children, the most vulnerable, has to come to an end. Cannot tolerate that in this time in society. With 4 African cases before the International Criminal Court, Uganda, the DRC, the Darfur region of Sudan, and the Central Africa Republic, and the beginning of an investigation into the post-violence in Kenya, the issue of justice and accountability is at the forefront of issues of conflict and stability. Can there be peace without justice? When, as in the case of South Africa,
Handheld, check.
can peace and national healing come about in the absence of accountability? No peace, no justice, no justice, no peace. It's very difficult. There has to be accountability. And if there's accountability, leaders of the future will think twice before they perpetrate injustices on their people. So we believe that it's not a punitive message, but it's a message that will be preventive, so that leaders will know they do not have the right to murder, kill, rape their people. With greater stability comes greater prospect for economic growth, and we are seeing this bearing fruit all over Africa. According to the OECD, 2010 Outlook report on Africa, foreign direct investment grew leading up to 2009, each year on the right trajectory. But as we all know, there was a global downturn, and so that also impacted Africa. Other good news in the report includes that African governments have instituted strategies that maintain foreign investment, particularly in natural resources, a critical element of sustainable development on the continent. Of course, we have to make sure that in the future, Africa's mineral wealth, their diamonds and gold and platinum, doesn't make the rest of the world wealthy and keep Africa poor. We've got to turn that formula around. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has fostered development through poverty alleviation programs on the continent beginning way back in 1961, when it was established by President Kennedy following the passage of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961. The Millennium Challenge Corporation picks up where USAID leaves off, working with countries further along in good governance and stability to develop compacts. Of the 20 compacts the MCC has worldwide, 12 have been to African nations. And these compacts are significant, $690 million to Mozambique, and tremendous numbers of $700 million to countries like Cape Verde and Ghana. And so we are seeing significant investment by the administration in the African countries. 12 of 20 are in Africa, and we're very proud. Next year, we'd like to see 24 of 30 in Africa. So today, in addition to hearing about the U.S. government programs and what the U.S. is doing at the Africa Development Bank to stir economic growth, we'll also hear about new initiatives taking place at the village level by private organizations like AfriCare and the Millennium Promise, and of the initiatives started by committed and motivated individuals in the United States, particularly many Africans in the diaspora. Another important element is the role of cultural diplomacy and how the art that emerged from the continent and displayed so majestically at the National Museum of African Art, past and present, can teach us about the history, the future, and the people of Africa. Overall, the purpose of today's event is to leave with a renewed sense of mission, whatever the capacity, to assist the nations and people of Africa in reaching the level of development that they seek. Despite the challenges, the opportunities and the potential are great, and even beyond that which we can imagine today. And so let Africa forge ahead towards 50 more years of progress and growth. I believe it will happen. I know it will. Let me thank each of today's speakers for sharing your time. All of you are very important, and our first speaker is already late for his next appointment. He won't say anything because he's too nice a person, but I know that. But so we will move right into that section of the program, and I will introduce the speakers. They will then come up, the distinguished speakers that I have honored to introduce need no introduction, really, but we feel that you should know a few of the points of their distinguished careers. Dr. Raja Shaw was sworn in as the 16th Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development December 31st, 2009, a government agency which has provided economic and humanitarian assistance worldwide for over 50 years. And his first task was an earthquake in Haiti, which was devastating. So you can imagine how he was greeted in his new position. Previously, Dr. Shaw served as Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics, as a Chief Scientist at the United States Department of Agriculture. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Dr. Shaw served as Director of Agriculture Development in the Global Development Programs of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In the 7 years with the Gates Foundation, Dr. Shaw served as the Foundation's Director of Strategic Opportunities and as Deputy Director of Policy Finance for the Global Health Programs. Dr. Shaw also served as Healthcare Policy Advisor on the Gore 2000 presidential campaign and was a member of the Pennsylvania's Governor Ed Rendell's Transition Committee on Health. He is a co-founder of Health Systems Analysis and Project Impact for South Asian Americans. He served as a policy aide in the British Parliament and worked at the WHO, the World Health Organization. Dr. Shaw earned his MA degree from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School and his master's degree in health economics at the Wharton School of Business. He has attended the London School of Economics, graduate of the University of Michigan, and has published articles on health and global health. I'll simply not continue with the rest. It goes on and on. He is married, though, with 2 children. I will mention that. At this time, we'll hear Dr. Shaw. When he finishes, then I'll introduce the other 2 panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank Congressman Payne and the CBC for organizing today's summit. Both you, sir, and the caucus have been persistent, passionate, and articulate advocates and leaders on behalf of Africa. And that advocacy has been vital to USAID's efforts on behalf of the continent, and I want to express our appreciation for your really unwavering support. I also want to thank President Kiir, who I know is not here now, but I believe is joining later, in his delegation, whom I had the chance to meet with in May in Juba. I want to assure you all that the Obama administration is using all of the tools at our disposal to ensure and to support the January referenda in the South and Abyei so that they occur on time and effectively. No matter the results, as the chairman mentioned, the world is fervently hoping Sudan and its neighbors are spared future conflict. On that note, I'd also like to thank General Scott Gratian, who I know is also joining later today, who's our special envoy to Sudan and who has worked tremendously hard and deftly to tackle the complex and political and humanitarian challenges in that environment. All of us here know the region has seen more than its share of strife in recent years, and we all hope it can escape yet another potential episode of conflict. The title of your conference today is Africa Forging Ahead. And I think that bears notice. That title is not followed by a question mark. It's not Africa Forging Ahead. It's not spoken with any sense of ambivalence or doubt. It's spoken with confidence. And Africa is forging ahead. No one here should doubt that. The Africa of today is a continent in which growth and democracy are ever more the norm, and where strong men and stagnant economies are increasingly less common. The Africa of today is one in which the images of famine and strife grow fainter, replaced by images of a continent united by pride, infused with enthusiasm and entrepreneurship, and eager for change and economic growth. The Africa of today even hosted the world's largest single sporting event, the World Cup. So Africa is forging ahead, and that is the truth. But unfortunately, it's not, as you all know, the only truth. Today I'd like to share with you some other thoughts about Africa, about its future, and about the role the United States is playing in its continued success. Over the past 2 decades, we've witnessed the greatest gains globally in human history. Since the Millennium Development Goals were first introduced, dramatic progress has been made toward meeting them. From 1990, the number of people living in extreme poverty, less than $1.25 a day, has fallen by nearly 400 million. Now, many are quick to point out that much of that progress has been focused on places like India and China. But the truth is, Africa has made tremendous strides as well. I have in my hand, let me show you this because it's very important. I have in my hand a copy of a new report that came out by the Center for Global Development, and it's titled, "Who are the MDG Trailblazers?" It's an interesting paper, and I encourage you all to read it, but I'm going to spoil part of it for you by telling you the punchline. 5 of the MDG trailblazers, as identified in the study, are in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, sub-Saharan Africa accounts for the largest number of star performers against Millennium Development Goals, including dramatic achievements by Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Ghana, Mali, and Uganda. From falling child mortality rates in Niger to increased access to education in Tanzania, really tremendous gains have been made. Now, these successes should be celebrated, and much credit should be given to governments, NGOs, private businesses that have prioritized development. The truth is, the work they have done has made achieving the MDGs by 2015 a reality, and inspired this administration to firmly commit to delivering on that outcome. But here's the truth. What has been done so far is not nearly enough. To put it simply, based on current rates of progress, we will not achieve the MDGs by 2015. And that's not conjecture, it's a statistical fact. What has worked in the past decade will not sustain us in the next 5 years if our goal is truly achieving the goals. So I don't make that statement to be pessimistic. I, as well as the President and the Secretary of State, firmly believe in the MDGs and firmly believe we can achieve them. But success is not inevitable. It's not impossible, but it's not inevitable. It will require a large and fundamental shift in both our thinking and our approach. So what do I propose? What type of approach is USAID taking to support achieving the MDGs, especially in Africa? Most importantly, we are reallocating our resources to give Africa the priority it fundamentally deserves. When I first arrived at USAID back in January, I came in believing Africa should be the top priority for the entire development community. I thought it was the center of gravity, not just for development dollars and investment, but for the application of development effort and for where the best and creative minds in development should go and should focus on. But what I soon learned was that the commitment to post-conflict situations, humanitarian relief, and others were actually far higher. The time, money, and energy spent in war zones on disaster relief far outmatches the resources committed to sub-Saharan Africa to broadly achieve the MDGs. In fact, 40% of USAID's Foreign Service officer positions in African missions currently sit vacant. Now, everyone knows that Africa matters. Everyone believes that this is true. But how we are translating this into operational reality is less clear and is often the difference between success and failure. It's important to keep in mind that the world is filled with competing priorities. That is why I look to the CBC and others in this room who are invested in Africa's success and who continue to be persuasive, reliable, and intelligent advocates on behalf of the continent. To elevate the importance of Africa, the Obama administration has increased U.S. assistance to the continent by additional $519 million, bringing our total annual commitment to $7.3 billion. As a result, Africa now receives the largest share of U.S. development assistance targeted towards poverty relief. And to address our staffing concerns, USAID is devising a number of reforms to incentivize and direct talent to the continent. Helping Africa means more than aid dollars. Often our sharpest minds can be more effective than our largest checks. The administration has also unveiled 3 new major initiatives that will be critical to improving global health, food security and agriculture, and climate resilience in Africa. The President's Global Health Initiative was created to achieve major improvements in global public health and represents a commitment of $63 billion over 6 years. And rather than attacking diseases individually and from the outside, the initiative fundamentally focuses on tying health programs together, creating integrated, coordinated systems of care, and investing in country-owned plans and aspirations for their health systems and their health sector. And there's a good reason for this type of approach. When we focus all of our efforts on one disease or one condition or one medical intervention, we often crowd out cost-effective, life-saving interventions. By taking a more holistic approach, we can use our resources in the most cost-effective way, reach the most people, and save the most lives. Similarly, the President's Feed the Future initiative is tackling food insecurity, poverty, and malnutrition through an inclusive, country-led approach. This initiative, which is part of the President's desire to cut the developing world's vulnerability to the kind of price volatility we've seen in agriculture over the last several years, most notably with the food price crisis in 2008, but even quite currently with the immediate spike in wheat and grain prices that we're seeing right now. This initiative has been shaped by Africa. The President has pledged at least $3.5 billion over 3 years to develop and implement this important new effort, and leverage that commitment to drive a $22 billion pledge from other donors around the world. The initiative is designed to increase crop yields, expand markets and trade, and boost the economic prospects of smallholder farmers, most of whom in Africa are women. Finally, because we know Africa is being hit first and worst by climate change, the President has introduced the Global Climate Change Initiative, a $30 billion program to help meet the adaptation and mitigation needs of developing countries, including those in Africa. All of these initiatives present a critical opportunity to invest in innovation, an approach I believe the development community must largely echo. Innovation can serve as a powerful amplifier of our investments and our efforts. Perhaps the most powerful means we have of achieving change, and the most important thing we can do to change our path of success and try to actually achieve the Millennium Development Goals on time. For example, During the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake, survivors trapped in rubble used their mobile phones, that may be one of them, to text, they used their mobile phones to text a mapping service called USAID, and this is really important. The service translated their texts, used GPS, global positioning systems, to track and locate them, and then directed rescue crews to go save their lives. USAID presented the relief effort with a surprising and new way to harness existing technology to improve outcomes. And here's something else that surprises people. USAID is a Kenyan organization. In fact, the word USAID is Swahili. It means witness. It was first devised to help track incidents of election violence in Kenya during the 2008 elections. During that same, I had the chance to visit Kenya, and during that trip I met an incredible woman named Ori Okola, and she's the young founder of USAID, as well as a number of other African entrepreneurs creating similar businesses or social entrepreneurship models that are really transformative. As we move to embrace innovation, it's important for us to recognize that innovation can come from anywhere, and often and increasingly is coming from entrepreneurs like Ori in Africa. But any progress that innovation provides us with will be of little benefit unless development is pursued with a new focus on accountability. Over the past 5 decades, several African leaders, many of whom began their tenure with great respect for democracy and the rule of law, succumbed to the alluring and corrupting pull of power. Though they may have once led protests, once in power, they began to ban them. Though they may have called for elections, once in power, they began to delay them. And though they may have written constitutions, once in power, they decided often to ignore them. This presents the development community with a delicate but important challenge. We want to ensure we do not punish people for the sins of their leaders, but we also do not want to foster or fund the spread of corruption. Therefore, we must work closely with our development partners to manage our assistance transparently and responsibly. We cannot always guarantee that every single development effort will work, but we can guarantee that these resources are spent in full view of the people they are meant to benefit. But the truth is, the need to hold ourselves to account is just as urgent. Often, our own programs do not build the local capacity they are intended to, and instead focus on building local compliance. We teach partner countries and their institutions to shape their efforts around our business models and our way of thinking, rather than adopting our methods and adapting our methods to their needs. We at USAID have been as guilty of this as anyone, measuring our success by the number of dollars spent on programs funded, rather than by the real benefit the programs actually deliver. That's why one of my most important missions was to lead a number of reforms within our own way of working. We will change the way we award contracts, increasing competition and allowing new types of partners to work with us. We will cut red tape to make it easier for local organizations in particular to access our resources, share their ideas, and partner with us over the long term. And we will aggressively measure and evaluate our own performance in a way that is transparent to U.S. taxpayers and to those in the countries where we serve. When our programs prove ineffective, we will stop funding them and channel our funding to more effective efforts. Because at the end of the day, we do not engage in this work to make ourselves feel better. We engage in it to provide a better life and better living standards for others. The stakes are simply too high, and our resources are far too scarce to support initiatives that yield little more than photo opportunities or fail to achieve real results. If we can take this novel approach to development, if we can redirect resources and pursue innovation and accountability, then we can meet the MDG commitments by 2015. And we can provide Africa the opportunity to embrace an even brighter future than has been realized through the past decade of growth. But that's all we can provide, the opportunity. Because though the development community can do many things, the truth and reality is, and the final truth I want to share with you today, is there are many things we cannot do. We cannot raise per capita incomes in countries if governments don't adopt policies that foster growth, trade, and investment. We cannot help farmers sell their crops if leaders don't invest in roads, infrastructure, and efficient and transparent marketing systems. We cannot enable young entrepreneurs to thrive if corruption and cronyism precludes new business starts and their access to capital and labor. And we cannot decide whether Africa achieves its full measure of promise through simple development initiatives. Only Africans can do that. As President Obama recently said in a remarkable conversation with an amazing group of young African leaders and entrepreneurs, only Africans can determine their own destiny. Ultimately, it is up to the emerging generation of young and ambitious Africans like Ori Akola, and to the wisdom of African leaders like President Kiir, who will be with you later today, to ensure that Africa continues to forge ahead. Thank you.
Let's have another round of applause for our U.S. Administrator, Dr. Raja Shaw. Thank you very much. This time we will hear from our next presenter this morning. We're very privileged to have him with us. We have Dr. Luis Moreno Ocampo, prosecutor, International Criminal Court. On October 21st in 2003, April 2003, Luis Moreno Ocampo was unanimously elected in New York as the first prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. His mandate is to select and trigger investigations and prosecutions of the most serious crimes of concern to the international community, namely genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. He has currently opened investigations into the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, the Darfur region of Sudan, the Central Africa Republic, and more recently in Kenya, an analysis that alleged war crimes were committed under the jurisdiction during the past elections in Kenya. He has also had experience of genuine national proceedings in Georgia, Afghanistan, Guinea, Palestine, and Cote d'Ivoire. Prior to joining the International Court, Dr. Moreno Ocampo had a distinguished career as a prosecutor in Argentina, where he played a key role in trials connected with the transition from dictatorship to democracy. In 1985, Dr. Moreno Ocampo was the deputy prosecutor in the military junta trials, the first case against top commanders responsible for mass atrocities since the Nuremberg trials. He also served as prosecutor of the Federal Court of Buenos Aires from 1987 to 1992. During those years, he participated in prosecutions against guerrilla leaders and military rebels. He also conducted a great number of prosecutions against public officials for corruption. Upon his resignation in 1992, Dr. Moreno Ocampo founded a private law firm specializing in corruption control. He was a board member of the national and international NGOs and was a visiting professor at both Stanford and Harvard universities. Dr. Moreno Ocampo is a graduate of the University of Buenos Aires Law School and has published books and articles related to massive crimes and corruption. Following Dr. Marino Ocampo will be Dr. Janetta Cole, who was appointed director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art in March of 2009. The National Museum of African Art is the only museum in the United States dedicated to collection, conservation, and study and exhibition of traditional and comprehensive African art. Dr. Cole is also presently on the board, presently the board chairman of the Janetta B. Clark Global Diversity and Inclusion Institute, founded at Bennett College for Women in Greensboro, North Carolina. From 2002 to 2007, Dr. Clark Cole has served as president of Bennett College. Before that, Dr. Cole served as presidential distinguished professor of anthropology, women's studies, and African American studies from 1998 to 2001 at Emory University in Atlanta. From 1987 to 1997, Dr. Cole was president of Spelman College in Atlanta. Under her leadership, Spelman was named the #1 ranked liberal arts college of the South, all colleges in the entire South. Dr. Cole has conducted research in Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States, and has authored several books and scores of scholarly articles. She has been awarded 55 honorary doctorate degrees from colleges and universities, and is the recipient of numerous other awards. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Anthropological Association, having delivered its distinguished lecture in 2008. She serves on a number of boards, including Trans-Africa Forum and the National Visionary Leadership Project. Dr. Cole earned a doctorate degree and a master's degree in anthropology from Northwestern University and a bachelor's degree in sociology from Oberlin College. This time we will hear from Dr. Marino Ocampo.
Thank you very much, Congressman Payne, for inviting me here, but also for your leadership and your persistence in this fight. You're always fighting for good causes. I'm very glad to be with you. The world is changing dramatically, and Africa is leading. In 1998, 120 countries decided to end impunity for those crimes that we say never again, only to see that happen again and again and again. And Africa was on the lead. African countries was one of the regions who was pushing for this idea. So basically in 1998, 120 countries made a global coalition, a global social contract to end massive atrocities, a basic right. And then we need 60 countries to ratify this treaty, to put this treaty into reality. And again, the first country who ratified the treaty was Senegal. And today, 31 African countries are members of this treaty. They are leading the region. As a prosecutor, I remember my first meeting with President Mbeki when he was leading the African Union, and he explained to me, prosecutor, we need you because we have to end violence in Africa. That's our common goal. And I'm very happy to contribute to the effort of African leaders to solve the conflicts in Africa. As the numbers show that the conflict in Africa is going down. I'm very proud that I am helping or trying to contribute to this prevention of future crimes. As Congressman Payne, we are working in different countries. First, in northern Uganda, when the president of Uganda invited us to help him to control this group. Joseph Kony and the Lord Resistance Army, for the last 22 years, was abducting kids, transforming the boys in killers and the girls in sexual slaves. It's a group who abduct girls to use as a reward to the commanders. So the most beautiful girls were given as reward for Kony himself and his commanders. And they did not abduct one group of girls. They abducted entire schools. The entire high school was abducted, not once, many times. And they were doing this for 22 years. Nothing happened to them. I'm very glad, and as you know, in Gulu, northern Uganda, kids were walking kilometers to sleep in the center of the city to be protected, to be safe, the night commuters. I'm very glad the intervention of the court helped to stop this. The kids in Gulu are now sleeping in their own houses, and northern Uganda is changing. We're working in DRC. We start in the Ituri region. We prosecute Tomás Lubanga and Bosco Ntaganda, leaders of one group of militias terrorizing people there. Tomás Lubanga is in jail. Bosco Ntaganda is not. He's in the kibbutz, committing new crimes, in particular rapes in the kibbutz. The worst rapes, crimes were committed by troops commanded by Bosco Ntaganda. In the Ituri, we're also prosecuting the leaders of a second group who were fighting with Lubanga, and Bosco, Germán Katanga and Nujolo. These two leaders are in jail also, in trial. Then we have a new case now. We are doing a new investigation in the kibbutz area. And we hope in few weeks you will see the results. People arrested, trying to stop violence in the kibbutz. The kibbutz case shows the importance to control this type of crimes, because we know very well the genocide in Rwanda. But many people in many countries don't know that even worse than the genocide in Rwanda was the Congo Wars. More than 4 million people died in the Congo Wars as a result of the genocide in Rwanda, because basically the Hutus escaped from Rwanda to Congo, and some of the former genociders organized themselves and attacked Rwanda, and then Rwanda and Uganda invade Congo, first Congo War, then Laurent Kabila fight with Uganda and Rwanda, second Congo War, and still crimes for 2003. And in the last week, hundreds of women raped by FDLR. So we're investigating them, and in a few weeks you will see results. Then we are going to Central African Republic. There we have a imprisoned Jean-Pierre Bemba, former vice president of DRC. He managed a militia. He has his own militia, his own army, private army, and he basically raped hundreds of women and pillaged them. In this case, we show how a commander was using rape as a tool. We have a case in which the soldiers of Bemba were looking for the chief of the neighborhood, the chief of quartier. And when they identify the man, first they rape the daughters, then they rape the wife, and then they rape him in the middle of the village. And asked my general advisor, why they are raping this man? And he explained to me, gender crimes are crimes of discrimination. Women are discriminating, raping them. And when they rape this man, they treat him so badly that they treat him as a woman. That's why they rape him publicly. So Jean-Pierre Bemba is the first commander who will be prosecuted by command responsibility for rapes. And this trial is starting end of November. And as Congressman Payne said, we're also investigating in Kenya, because as you know, the last election in Kenya produced more than 1,200 killings, 3,000 people wounded, around 10,000 women raped, and 500,000 people forced displaced. And the goal here is to punish this, to avoid in the future, in the 2012 elections, this situation is repeated. So we are working very close with the African Union. Wow. Okay, wake up. I'm finishing. Kenya case, I hope, will help to prevent violence in 2012. I'm very proud that how Kenyans managed the last referendum for the constitution. There was a general election, zero problem. And even those who lose say, okay. So Kenya is changing, and that's the point. Africa is changing. It's not easy. It's difficult. There are a lot of contradictions, and there are leaders who want to change and leaders who don't like change. And that's why I like to finish with Darfur. because Darfur is probably the most difficult case we have. In 2005, the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council, decided that to control the situation in Darfur, they will promote no regime change in the Sudan. They will promote behavior change. And to change behavior, rules have to be clear. And to make rules clear, they request justice. So they refer to me the situation of Darfur to investigate. So our first challenge was how to investigate Darfur. We collect information and we can unveil how the crimes were committed. We found, in fact, the Sudanese army attacked the civilian following a model developed by the British Army. They organized security committees at the local level who know exactly what happened. The security committee integrate army, police, intelligence, local politicians, tribal leaders. And they organize the system in the area. They report to state committees, and these committees report to one person, Minister Ahmed Harun, the Minister for the Interior. When he visited for the first time Darfur, the full leaders told him, "We're very happy that you are here because we need protection. We are being under attack." Harun said, "You don't understand me. You are my enemies. I will destroy you." Imagine if today someone went to your house, raped your daughter, and you go to the police barrack, and the policeman say, "Madam, tomorrow we rape your daughter, and tomorrow we'll do it again, and next week we'll do it again." What you will do? And that's the problem in Darfur. The victims are being attacked by the government. The minister organized the attacks. So who will protect you if your army or police attack you? That's why they need Congressman Payne from outside helping them. And we present the first case against Ahmed Harun, but then President Bashir said, "I will not hand over Harun because he was following my orders." Harun was charged with 49 charges against humanity and war crimes. What I can do? If he say he gave the orders, okay, President, I have my suspicion about you, I will investigate you. So we keep investigating, and we found evidence about how Bashir himself supervised and gave orders to Harun. But in addition to that, because in addition to attacking in the villages, in 2005, almost all the villages in Darfur were empty. So there were 4 million people displaced, 2.5 million people in camp for displaced persons. And the new strategy, and was a lot of attention of the international community on Darfur. So the new strategy of President Bashir was like a silence genocide. Instead to kill with bullet, they rape the women, they produce fear, basically arresting the tribal leaders, the local leaders in the camps, and they strangulate assistants. So they control the assistants, trying to produce a slow death. So they use fear, rape, and hunger as the new tools to commit genocide. And in charge of this process was the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs, who in fact is a secret service, but the title is Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. Guess who was appointed Minister of Humanitarian Affairs to manage this process? A person called Ahmed Harun. So he moved from attacking the people in the village to be with them in the camps. And then we prosecute President Bashir for genocide. At the beginning, the judges refused the genocide charges. We had to litigate, went to appeal chambers. We won the case. Now, President Bashir is indicted for genocide. So genocide is not more an opinion. It's a judicial decision. And so for the first time in the world, we have an ongoing genocide with a court with judges from all the continents, including Africa. 4 of the judges who were involved in this case were from Africa, decided this is a genocide. So what we'll do? So this is our first challenge. What we'll do to stop the genocide in Darfur? It's ongoing. Hunger and rape are not noisy tools, but they are killing. And interestingly, what Bashir is doing is not stopping the genocide. He's stopping the information about the genocide. He's expelling those humanitarian assistants who are providing assistance to the people on the ground. They are expelled. When they check rapes, they are expelled. So he's stopping the information about genocide. So you don't read in the newspaper something today about what happened in Darfur because no one can talk. But the second problem is not just genocide in Darfur, it's a prospect of a new genocide in the south. That's the problem that we have today. There are two conflicts, one in Darfur and a problem coming in the south. And one of the most difficult areas is Abyei, because Abyei is in the border full of oil, and is the Kordofan area, who is the limit between north and south. Kordofan is the area who has all the oil, basically. So it will be the area to protect, the area to be sure you control. Guess who is currently the governor of Kordofan? Harun. Harun is today the governor of Kordofan. The man who committed the genocide in Darfur is today preparing the new crimes in the south. So there is an opportunity here. On the 24th of September, President Obama will talk in New York with other leaders in the world about Sudan. Madeleine Albright and William Cohen led a task force on prevention of genocide 1 year ago. And they say the key tool to control genocide is leadership and political will. That's what we need. You have a strong president that has leadership, and it's a time for him to collect the leadership of the other countries, to collect China, France, UK, supporting, stopping the genocide. If they made an agreement, genocide will be over in one day. So that is the mission. People in Darfur, people in the south need you, talking, working for them, helping them. And the opportunity is now. In 1 week, in New York, will be a meeting, crucial meeting for the future of the people. We did our cases. I cannot change behavior of them. I did my case, I wait for Bashir in court. But you don't need to put Bashir in court to save the life. You can use the court decision to change the behavior, to stop the crimes. I hope we can work together. Thank you very much.
Distinguished members of the administration and of Congress, the honorable women and men of the diplomatic corps, my sisters and my brothers all, good morning. Good morning. And as one would say in a certain institution, the black church, it's a great getting up morning. And the reason it is a great getting up morning is because once again, under the banner of the Congressional Black Caucus Legislative Weekend, we have come to learn more and to do more about the state of our communities, our nation, and our world. It's truly an honor and a joy for me to be included among the speakers at this year's Congressional Black Caucus Brain Trust on Africa, hosted yet again by Congressman Donald M. Payne. Now, some of us call Congressman Payne Mr. Africa, a title we use respectfully to acknowledge his continuous and unflinching advocacy for the people of Africa. Brother Congressman, we simply cannot thank you enough. But there is something we can do. We can join with you we can join with you in the ongoing struggle to address the critical issues facing Africa and the global Black communities. As you heard from the Congressman, I now serve as the director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art, our nation's only museum that is dedicated to collecting, preserving, exhibiting, and educating about the visual arts of the continent of Africa. Each day that my colleagues and I engage in this work, and it really is sacred work, each day we're reminded of the indisputable fact that the traditional and contemporary art that we are charged with protecting and presenting and explaining, that this body of work comes from the only place on earth that is the cradle of humanity. And it is because Africa is the place that birthed us all that we welcome the diverse visitors who come to our museum by saying, "Welcome home." Now, I am fond of saying that the sooner that white folks acknowledge that they are Africans too, the better our world is going to be. Two of my colleagues from the National Museum of African Art are here this morning, and I would like to introduce them. Ms. Anita Henry, Associate Director for External Affairs, and Mr. Eddie Burke, who is our very recently appointed Public Affairs Specialist. A few weeks ago, Anita Henry, Dr. Christine Mullen-Kramer, Deputy Director and Chief Curator, and I were in Johannesburg, South Africa. We went on a friend-raising and a fundraising mission. At the suggestion of Terry DeMeyer, whom many of you know, we paid a visit to Mr. Norbert Dorr, a director in McKinsey's Johannesburg office. I left that meeting with a wealth of specific information that fundamentally challenges ideas that most people in my country have about Africa. Now, as a longtime educator, how well I know the power of knowledge. One of my sheroes, the great educator Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, once said, "Knowledge is the prime need of the hour." In the few minutes that I have, I want to share with you just a few of the facts that appear in two publications that report on recent research conducted by McKinsey. These facts and figures present a picture of the African continent that provides a balance to the constant stream of television, radio, print media stories about poverty, disease, and violence. And indeed, with no intention of disputing those realities, how could one, after the presentations this morning by Dr. Shaw and Mr. Ocampo? But we do need balance. We do need balance if we are to fully understand, support, and be respectful participants in change that must occur among the 50-plus nations of that large, complex, diverse, and dynamic continent. Here are just a few of the realities about Africa that are presented in this extensive work by the McKinsey people. One of the publications has an engaging title. It is Lions on the Move: The Progress and Potential of African Economies. As a former president of 2 historically black colleges for women, I would prefer the title to read Lions and Lionesses on the Move. This McKinsey report says that Africa's economic pulse has quickened, infusing the continent with a new commercial vibrancy. Real GDP rose 4.9% per year from 2000 through 2008, more than twice its pace in the 1980s and 90s. Telecom, banking, and retail are flourishing. Construction is booming. Foreign investment is surging. Excuse me. This report does not challenge the reality that many of the individual African economies continue to face serious challenges, including poverty, disease, high infant mortality, war, poor government policies, and something I care about so deeply, the physical and sexual abuse of women and children. But hear this: Africa's collective GDP at $1.6 trillion in 2008 is now roughly equal to Brazil's or Russia's. And the continent is among the world's most rapidly growing economic regions. This acceleration is a sign of hard-earned progress and promise. In summary terms, here are the key findings from the McKinsey study. There are 4. Africa's growth acceleration is the result of more than a resource boom. More important were actions taken by governments to end political conflicts, to improve macroeconomic conditions, and to create better business climates. These actions have enabled growth to accelerate broadly across countries and sectors. Secondly, Africa's future growth will be supported by external trends, such as the global race for commodities, Africa's increased access to international capital, and its ability to forge new types of economic partnerships with foreign investors. Thirdly, long-term growth also will be lifted by internal social and demographic trends, particularly Africa's growing labor force, urbanization, and the related rise of middle-class consumers. And finally, by 2020, 4 groups of industries together will be worth $2.6 trillion in annual revenue. The 4 groups are consumer-facing industries, such as retail, telecommunications, and banking, infrastructure-related industries, agriculture, and resources. For those of you who know me, you may be wondering why I, an anthropologist, an educator, turned into the director of an art museum, would spend this time talking about the current state and the future promise of African economies. Actually, what I have shared with you about the state of Africa's economies is connected in a fundamental way to each of my fields. Anthropology, education, and museology challenge us to rethink how we think about history and, of course, her story, about everyday and complex issues in our world and indeed in our own lives. And as a woman who is obviously of African descent, I feel a personal responsibility to help to set the record straight about a place, the only place from which we are all descended, a place that today and in the future has a major role to play in the affairs of the world. I'm going to end this talk with a story that I must have told I can't even count how many times. But it's such a good story. And you know, a good story is worth repeating. It's a story that indicates who in the world has the responsibility to correct the myths about Africa, to present a balanced picture of that great economy, great continent, and to use correct information about Africa in the interest of the people of the continent, the global Black community, the world. The story was a favorite story of one of my sheroes. You will know her name, many of you will. Fannie Lou Hamer. You remember, thank you so much. You remember that great, great warrior for civil rights and human rights, who once said, "I'm sick and tired of being..." But unlike some of us who merely say it, Fannie Lou Hamer, of course, got up every day and did something. That daughter of sharecroppers did something to help the world get better. And as you know, Fannie Lou Hamer led many a Black person up those steps of the Mississippi State House, daring to demand the basic right of an American citizen to vote. And so, Congressman Payne, when it's voting time and I encounter any African American who says, "I don't have time to vote," I say, then let the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer come down and haunt ya. And so with dogs at her ankles, water hoses on her back, and billy clubs on her head, she led her community in the struggle for the right to vote. And as you know, went on to become or to lead the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Well, Fannie Lou Hamer loved to tell this story at the end of a talk because it would say, who has the responsibility to do whatever work she had just laid out? The work that I have asked in my brief talk for us to do is to grab a hold of as much information as we can to gain a balanced view about this continent, never to shy away from the atrocities, the almost unspeakable atrocities, crimes against humanity that our brother Ocampo has just described. But to also understand that this is a continent of extraordinary beauty in its art, of amazing accomplishments by its people, a continent that indeed birthed us all. So who has that work to do? Whose responsibility is it? Here's the story quickly. You probably know the story. It's the story of a young bunch of boys, or a bunch of young boys, who played hooky from school and decided to get into trouble. And they managed. They found a bird and just about tortured that poor bird to death. But as boys or girls will do when they are in trouble, they at some point got bored with it. And so they looked for more trouble. And the leader said, let's go up the road a piece and find that old lady, because that old lady up the road, we're going to ask her a question she could never, ever, ever answer. Well, what's the question? Asked one of the boys. Well, I'm going to take this bird, said the ringleader. I'm going to put it behind my back, and I'm going to say to that old lady, old lady, old lady, this bird that I have behind my back, is it dead or is it alive? Now, if the old lady says, why, the bird is dead, I'm going to release my hand and the bird will fly away. But if to the question, is the bird dead or alive, she says, why, the bird is alive, I'm going to crush it. Convinced that the old lady could never, ever give the correct answer, they did their bumps, they did their high fives, and off they went to find the old lady. With that kind of incivility, disrespect that some, not all of our young'uns have, the ringleader said, old lady, you gonna answer this question? And with that unbelievable decency, compassion of our elders, many, most of our elders, she said, why, my sons, I will try. Remember now, the answer the old lady gives tells you who is to join with Congressman Payne, who is to join with Dr. Shaw, who is to join with our brother Ocampo in understanding the realities of Africa, in making sure that myths are destroyed, in holding accountable the leadership of those 50-plus nations, all in the interests of a better world. Who's to do that? Well, when this young'un said to the old lady, answer the question, tell me, where is the bird? Is it dead or is it alive? The old lady said, you know how old folk do. Sometimes they take a long time. And then they start their, the bird, she said, why, it's in your hands. That's the answer. All of this work, it's really in your hands and in mine. Thank you.
really let us give another round of applause to our distinguished guests. We really appreciate the tremendous words from Dr. Raja Shaw. Of course, it's quite a unique opportunity to have Dr. Luis Moreno Ocampo here. I'd like to commend him for the courageous work that you continue to do. And there's no question that as you reveal the facts, there will be people who will question whether their behavior is acceptable anymore in this millennium. And of course, Dr. Janetta Cole, who has done so much to forward the culture and beauty of Africa as she continues in her current responsibilities. It's really very, very rewarding to have them here. We really appreciate that. And we're going to dismiss the first panel, but before I do that, I know we had several members from the Africa Diplomatic Corps here, and I might just ask them if they will stand. I see an ambassador from Eritrea. There may be others here. Representative from South Sudan. This time we will have our moderator for the second panel to come up in a moment.
Can you ask a question, please? At least one from Mr. Ocampo?
No, there are no questions for this period. We will have after the second panel.
Will Mr. Ocampo be here?
Yeah, I will wait for you.
And also, although he did not send up, the ambassador from Chad is here. Won't you please stand and let's give a round of applause to the ambassador of Chad. Our second panel will begin, and the moderator will be Reed Kramer. Reed Kramer is the Chief Executive Officer and Director, and was the founder of the founder and president of the managing editor of Africa News Service, a nonprofit U.S.-based agency producing award-winning news and information broadcast and print media. Under his direction, Africa News Service was consistent early adopter of communications technologies, and he created and developed Africa Online, the first as well as the largest Africa-related information source on the internet. He has reported regularly for the Washington Post, National Public Radio, and the BBC, and has served as a news consultant and guest for CNN, Today Show, Court TV, and the NewsHour on public television. His economic and political reporting has appeared widely in major North American and international publications. He is a graduate of Duke University and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So at this time, as people come in and move out, we would like to ask Reed Kramer if he would come forward, and his panel will have a seat, and we'll move immediately into our second phase of the program. Let's have a hand for Reed Kramer.
Thank you very much, Congressman Payne. This room is getting very filled up, and we're glad to see that, and we're running behind. So we're going to do everything we can to move things forward. I think that's why they brought me in here to be the bad guy that has to watch the clock, and I'm sure the people on the panel will be mad at me when we're finished. But we're going to do the best we can to get through this quickly and get audience participation. And speaking of participants, please, if you haven't done so, turn off your cell phones. Be respectful of others that are here. We're also introducing a new way of audience participation to try to make it more efficient and more possible to get more questions in. The staff from the subcommittee and friends will be distributing, if you haven't, I guess they've already started, distributing index cards for you to submit your questions, and partway through this first panel, they'll be going around to collect them. So please get your questions ready. So we're going to move quickly, and we're going to forego the long introductions. You can get more information easily these days. So we're going to begin with the topic that's at the top of anybody's agenda looking at Africa today, and that's the conflict in Somalia. We're very pleased to have with us today the special envoy from the Transitional Federal Government of Somalia, Mr. Abukar Arman, and I'll ask you to speak first. Let me say that we're going to ask you all, and I know this is very difficult, to try to limit your remarks to synopsize in 2 or 3 minutes. I've been given enforcement cards. We're going to try to move through this. And if you have longer and prepared presentations, I'm sure the subcommittee would be glad to have them, and certainly we will publish them on allafrica.com.
Chairman Payne, members of the Congress, the diplomatic corps, respected guests, good morning. As Africa celebrated its 50th year of independence, a half a century of independence, for Somalia, the only totally failed state, had an opportunity to reflect. And it is not an easy position to be in. However, failure is not a permanent state unless the people of that country decide it to be. So we have an opportunity to reflect as people what went wrong in the last 50 years and find ways to mend our fences, to correct our ways, and to move forward with the rest of the continent. It's by no means an easy challenge. Every time I think of Somalia, I'm a visual thinker. So I see this patient who suffers from multiple illnesses, some of which are external, some of which are self-inflicted. And then meanwhile, that patient is lying in an ICU, and the members of the family are arguing which illness to treat first. And then the others, the more corrupted ones, or the greedy ones, are in the process of looting that patient and doing all kinds of things to end it. So that's the condition I see. So solving such problems, then we have to approach it as though we are professionals who work in a trauma center. We look at the patient, we try very hard to stabilize that patient. Look for a sign that indicates that the patient is still alive. Is there a heartbeat? Is the brain functioning? And then you work from there. And then you focus on the critical ones, those critical illnesses. And then celebrate small victories. And then keep in mind that this is a process. A comatose patient that moves his finger, that's a sign that that person is coming back. We celebrate. But if there's a counter argument that says, why is that patient not running? Why is that patient not paying his bills? Why is that patient not attending school or taking care of his family? Then we have a losing argument there. So that's the country of Somalia. And in that context, I want you to think about other problems that occurs that hinders the progress of that patient. And the problems are many that impede the peace process to take effect. Of course, it's internal, and the blame at the end lies on the Somali people. But there are also other factors, and we cannot ignore that. And every time we address this issue, if we just focus one angle of it, you can take it any direction you want, depending where you start telling the story. And that has been the case for Somalia. Here in this city, there are multiple places where discussions are taking place. And then you listen to where it leads to. One of the problems is there aren't a lot of good analysis, good information coming from Somalia. There is no international media. The media relies on individuals that are not professionally trained. These individuals report to them the daily events that takes place in Mogadishu. That reporter is sitting somewhere in New York, somewhere in Nairobi, getting paid well. No disrespect to the reporters. He adds few lines and signs on both names. And then the next newspaper duplicates the same thing, and you read the same story as though it's written by the same person all over. But no analysis. That lazy thinking is leading to any fad that comes out as a form of resolution or a solution to the Somali problem to gain momentum immediately. Because no one has a lot of facts. And if there is a catchphrase such as, for example, constructive disengagement, you know, everybody's saying constructive. Yes, constructive disengagement. You know. But then you wonder and you say, what constructive disengagement are you talking about? Somalia went through 20 years that the United States was disengaged. You know, is it to continue with that? And then who guarantees that other states are not going to be part of that? That they're not going to push their policies or their goals and so forth and so on. So, but you listen to different circles, people are discussing these fads that come out without any analysis. Okay. So that's the problem that we face, but I'll respect the order to cut it short. I'll stop here and I'll entertain the questions. Thank you very much.
Come on up, John. The next speaker, John Pendergast, is well known to many of you, very active on African issues for many years, co-founder of Enough Project, which is mobilizing public response on many of the key issues in Africa. John?
Thanks, Reed. Good luck having Dikembe and me speak for 2 minutes. Yeah, that's going to happen. Sorry, I'll do my best. Africa, forging ahead. When you're forging ahead, you have to know that it's possible to get where you want to go. When we start talking about the big conflicts in Africa, most people outside of this room don't believe we can get there. Most people outside this room think that places like Sudan and Congo and other places the Chief Prosecutor Ocampo we're talking about are hopeless. In fact, most people think Africa's hopeless. So if we're going to do something about these conflicts, we have to demonstrate that change is possible. And luckily enough, there is massive evidence on the continent in that regard. The stories simply haven't been told. All of us outside, inside and outside of this room know about blood diamonds. They saw Leonardo DiCaprio running around what was staged to be Sierra Leone. But how many of those people that saw that film know that today Sierra Leone is a peaceful, thriving democracy? Most people know, thanks to Naomi Campbell, that at some point Liberia was part of that whole blood diamond story, and it must be just as hopeless as every other place, or dirty stones, whatever we want to call them. But how many outside this room know that today Liberia is a thriving, peaceful democracy? Most of us have heard around in this room and outside around the world have heard of Idi Amin. Many even saw Forrest Whitaker's Academy Award portrayal of him. There is Uganda in the minds of most people. How many know that today Uganda is a thriving, peaceful country with a very, very robust civil society? We could go on about Mozambique and Angola and the transitions that have occurred there, at least what's the name of, who played Nelson Mandela? My God, I'm having a, Morgan Freeman. At least some people saw that film, so they know that South Africa actually has changed. But generally speaking, you have all these extraordinary stories of transformation all over Africa that, again, if people don't know that this exists, they won't believe that it's possible for the countries that we're potentially here today to talk about have the capacity to change. Now let's turn our attention to these present conflicts that are so urgent. I think there are huge opportunities today for just if we limit ourselves to the three conflicts that Chief Prosecutor Ocampo talked about, the probably three deadliest wars on the continent of Africa, excepting Somalia, the Lord's Resistance Army and the damage it's doing, the war in Darfur and the potential war in South Sudan combined, and then the war in Eastern Congo. If you just take Congo and Sudan alone and their two wars, we're talking about 8 or 9 million freshly dug graves. There's nothing like it in the world since World War II. So the issues in these places cannot be more urgent. So let's talk for a second about the opportunities that exist now. Sudan, we finally have an administration at the top levels waking up to the moment, that fact that it is 10 minutes till midnight in southern Sudan. The referendum is 4 months away for the independence of the South, and the potential for resumption of a war that was the second deadliest war in the world after Congo since World War II. And the genocide by attrition that Luis described continues in Darfur with very little comment. Next week, as we just heard, President Obama is going to New York for the UN General Assembly meeting. He's going to be part of a meeting specifically on Sudan, chaired by the United Nations Secretary General. This is an extraordinary opportunity. The message of peace that he will bring, no doubt, needs to be, and this is where we come in, needs to be rooted in consequences. There need to be consequences for actions that would return southern Sudan to war. There need to be consequences for the commission of grave human rights abuses, including genocide, in Darfur. There are specific things that President Obama can do in that regard that will get the attention of the parties, particularly the government in Sudan, and make a significant and critical difference. If his message is bereft of accountability and consequences, it will be largely meaningless, and it will be music to the ears of the perpetrators of these human rights crimes. Secondly, the LRA, as Luis said, 22 years with total impunity. Finally, we have the ICC indictments of the leadership. Finally, we have a movement across the country that even people inside this room know little about. It's all young people on college campuses and in high schools, called the Invisible Children Movement. Over 1 million people writing the letters to their members of Congress about kids, formerly or currently abducted children who they will never meet, places they will never go. And they were able to, with leadership of people like Congressman Payne, get a bill through Congress that had the highest number of co-sponsors ever for any Africa-related legislation. An extraordinary accomplishment this year in a moment of acrimony between the two parties here in the United States. And that bill basically asked President Obama to come up with a strategy to end this terrible threat to children all across Central Africa that is posed by the Lord's Resistance Army. Don't manage the consequences. Don't just keep sending humanitarian assistance and little dribs and drabs of aid around the edges. Fix the problem. What's your strategy? There are at the most 1,000 militia running around under the LRA, probably less. We can't deal with that. Led by one guy, Joseph Kony. We can't capture him. We have the capacity, we have the resources. How are we going to apply it? What's the strategy? Who do we work with? Let's lead. This is the moment. Congress has spoken, people have spoken, now it's up to the administration. An extraordinary opportunity. Third and finally, the biggest, by far, war in the world since World War II. And I'll leave Dikembe to be able to speak more to this than me, but Congo. 5.4 million people dead, estimated, since this conflict began in the mid-1990s. Sometimes these wars can feel very far away and just outside of our reach, basically unsolvable. But Congo, I think, is very, very different. Every one of us in this room, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, is inadvertently directly connected to the war in the Congo, because the minerals that are mined and fought over in the Congo power our cell phones, our laptops, our digital cameras, and the iPods and all the other electronic products that makes our lives so much easier, implicated. The minerals were the subject of a bill, again, Congressman Payne, key in all this, that was passed by Congress this year against tremendous industry opposition. It was truly a David and Goliath scenario. Congress occasionally, collectively, individuals certainly do, but occasionally collectively they stand up and do the right thing. They did. Stood up to the industry opposition, passed this bill on conflict minerals and said, we want transparency. We want to know where this stuff comes from, and we want to know if it's fueling wars. If our cell phones are fueling the highest rate of sexual violence in the world, American consumers have a right to know. So it's a first step, a salvo, an opening salvo in the battle to try to bring some sort of rationality to this whole international trade. It's time again for the United States to lead. Congress spoke, constituencies, people like us in this room have spoken. Now it's time for the administration. The blood diamonds needed to be cleaned up 10 years ago. World came together, governments, industry, civil society. Created a process, helped end wars in Angola, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Direct connection. Wasn't the only thing, but there was one of the critical catalysts. We can do the same thing today. We can come together, governments led by the United States, Rwanda, Congo, Uganda, the countries that are right there in the region, working together with the industry, with Apple, Hewlett-Packard, all these companies, and civil society groups work together, come up with a way to separate out the clean minerals from the minerals that are fueling the rapes and the destruction in eastern Congo. It can be done. It's time to demand conflict-free phones, rape-free laptops. The bird, I love it, the bird is in our hands, frankly speaking, and it is not hopeless. Let's all stand up for peace in Africa. Thank you.
Everyone here who works in or with Africa knows of success stories. We know of grassroots efforts that go on against amazing odds. John MacArthur is going to tell us about a project, a series of projects that is very exciting to hear about. He's from the Millennium Project, and he's at the Earth Institute at Columbia. John, please come up and share with us some of your news.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be together. Thank you so much to Congressman Payne and your team for having me today. It's a big agenda. We're talking about a lot of scary challenges, a lot of inspiring moments. And we're on the eve this week, today, of a very large gathering of world leaders next week. Before the General Assembly convenes, there's a special 3-day summit on the Millennium Development Goals taking place. President Obama will be there on Wednesday, speaking before he goes to the General Assembly on Thursday. And this is actually the last major checkpoint of these goals, which were set in 2000 by the largest, at the time, largest ever gathering of world leaders to tackle the deep and trenchant challenges of extreme poverty by 2015. And so I'm not going to talk to you today about the things that my colleagues here have so much more expertise on, the conflict, the negotiation, the legal repercussions, the politics, which are so tough. I want to talk a little bit about the longer-term investments, the longer-term conditions that increase the risks of those problems so much. We know that in the conditions of extreme poverty, there's a much higher risk of conflict. We know that when the rains fail and people can't grow food and they're hungry, they're much more likely to fight with their neighbors. We know that when the climate changes and the rains keep failing, we're much more likely to see those conflicts persist. And we know that in places where 1 out of every 3 children might die, or 1 out of every 5, death becomes all too normal. Not because a life is worth any less, but because people just somehow, through the human spirit, manage to accept this and keep moving on. It doesn't have to be that way. And fortunately, it's less and less becoming that way. And I really just want to talk about 3 basic things. It's such a big issue and a big agenda, tackling extreme poverty. But there are 3 basic things I would like to leave you with today. One is that there aren't just success stories happening, although there are many for sure. There are breakthroughs happening. And each of those breakthroughs was considered impossible, too hard, not going to work, and why would you even try before that happened? A lot of people in this room were involved with the campaign to tackle the AIDS pandemic. A decade ago, there were 25 million people infected, a couple million people in Africa alone dying every year, and not a single person on treatment in Africa due to any lifting of a finger of the international community. Maybe about 10,000 people had treatment because they could afford the pills. 5 years ago, there was basically no international effort of consequence, despite a lot of hard work from a lot of people, to tackle malaria, killing 1 million children a year because they couldn't get a few doses of medicine that cost $1, couldn't get a bed net that cost $5. It's too hard, it would never work. Pick up the front page of the newspaper, oh, they'll use them as fishing nets and wedding dresses anyways, why bother? And everyone would say it's just not worth it. Year after year, you saw Africa, the one part of the world not to have a breakthrough for its farmers, where most of the continent is farmers, just be stuck, not even able to grow enough food to feed their families typically, let alone sell something to their neighbors. But each of those issues, each of those deep, deep challenges has had an extraordinary breakthrough, and on each of them, I can tell you I was in a lot of the meetings where everyone said, it's too hard, it won't work, they can't do it, why bother? And thanks to a lot of very persistent efforts, again, of people in this room and people around the world, and crucially, people in the communities and villages and capitals of Africa, we now have a few million people on AIDS treatment. We have about 200 million bed nets distributed in the past 4 years alone, en route to every sleeping site in Africa in an endemic zone being under a bed net in the next several months. We have Malawi. Malawi in 2002, it's one of my favorite stories. In 2002, Malawi was deemed the perfect storm by the head of UNICEF at the time because it was just ravaged by malaria, by AIDS, by this landlocked civil war next door for 15 years. What can you, drought, famine, what can you do? Well, Malawi, the president in 2005 made a bold choice. He said, just like everyone else in the world gets to help their farmers, I want to help my farmers. And he did something very, very simple. He said, I'm going to make sure every farmer in my country has access to a bag of fertilizer and a can of modern seeds. And that country has doubled its food production as a country in the time since that. And it went from being a net food importer to being a net food exporter. And in the world food crisis, the last one, get ready for the next one, Malawi was giving food away to its neighbors, to the World Food Program, because it had surplus. That was impossible before it happened. And there's more. That same year, 2008 was a tough year for the world economy. The global economy pretty much imploded, almost imploded if it didn't. Malawi grew at 9%. Because when your business is growing food, if you grow more food, you're doing better business. And that's how Malawi's going to get out of the business of foreign aid. They're going to grow their way out of it by growing more and better crops. Now, there's a title in this topic, or in this session, of Connecting the Dots. And I really want to leave us with the message of connecting these dots. We have, in the best scientific journals, leading evidence that when the rains fail and when the temperature's too hot, the crops fail, and that's where you see conflicts around Africa. There's no question about that. We also know that the Sahel, the band below the Sahara, is one of the places to have the most dramatic climate changes in the world since 1970. And the rain has kind of fallen off a cliff. That's what's often called the drylands area. This is where we're also reading about all the conflicts. And so many people in the room are so deeply involved with tackling those challenges of the conflict. Well, if we want to tackle those challenges in the drylands and everywhere else, this is my second key point. Not just that we have to understand the breakthroughs are happening when everyone says it's impossible, but that we have to help people grow more food and have reliable access to food. Dr. Shah, who's been a leader on this effort for many years, talked about the Feed the Future initiative. There's no more important breakthrough underway right now than helping farmers around Africa grow more food. And growing more food needs three things. It needs seeds, it needs nutrients, usually fertilizer, and it needs water. And if you don't have water, that's tough. And if you're in the drylands and you don't grow food, you're a pastoralist, a nomad, it means you need help for your livestock. You need to make sure your camels stay alive. You need to make sure your goats stay alive, because those are your livelihood. We're working in the Somali region of northeast Kenya, and we're seeing how one water point and help for the camels and goats helps the economy begin to thrive. We're seeing in the Millennium Villages project, fertilizer, seeds, and even just a little bit of good rain can triple food production in just a couple of years. These are very doable things. So the breakthroughs are happening. We have to help people grow more food. And we have to understand that next week's summit isn't just a summit of governments, it's a summit of our global minds. There are meetings happening not just in the UN, there are meetings happening all around it, and in an interconnected world with Facebook in every corner. The president of Nigeria announced his candidacy on Facebook this week, literally. We have to understand how different the global conversation is today. There's entrepreneurship happening in every corner of this planet. There's online communities solving problems in every corner of this planet. And this is the room that represents, perhaps better than no other, what it looks like to take on the breakthroughs. Now, we might or might not see a good summit outcome next week, but we'll certainly see, I think, a great summit of the minds. Because there are people in every corner of Africa that I get to deal with, in the rural villages and the capital cities, and there are people in every corner of this country and other countries around the world that are committed to solving these problems of extreme poverty. And it's not just in our hands, but I'll suggest that it's in our understanding of the breakthrough. One of my own favorite lines is, after the last no comes a yes. And on that yes, the future world depends. That's what a breakthrough looks like. After the last no, get the yes. Thank you.
Thanks, John MacArthur from Millennium Promise, for helping us connect the dots, which is our mandate here today, and you can see it's a big job. And we're going to continue doing that with your questions. Please, if you have them, pass them to the aisles so that they can be collected. And after we hear our last speaker, we'll move into your dealing with that. Dikembe Mutombo is well known here, came to public awareness when he was a star on the Georgetown basketball team, and then went for From there to the NBA, where he spent 18 seasons. He was a 4-time NBA Defensive Player of the Year, and he led 2 franchises to the NBA Finals. He created the Dikembe Mutombo Foundation with the vision of attempting to eradicate childhood diseases in the Congo, from where he comes. And he's going to tell us about that work now.
It's so refreshing not to be the tallest person.
Thank you, Mr. Crane, for that kind of introduction. Good morning.
Good morning.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Congressman Payne, good to see you again. It's a great honor to be here with all of you and serving this extraordinary panel because of this topic of poverty, conflict, and human rights in Africa is very important to me. I've been asked about the role of Africa in diaspora, how they raise awareness and contribute to the African development. To start, according to the World Bank, the official estimate of the document, voluntary African immigrant in North America and Europe is about 3 million. 1 million in the US, 282,000 in Canada, and 1.7 in Europe. African immigrants in North America, you have a higher level of education compared to the average immigrant. As many came here to pursue higher education, a survey of an African PhD student in the US and Canada in 1986 and 96 showed that 44% decide to stay in a host country after completion of their education. This incident of no return has been the rise of the last 10 years, with the result that more than 1/3 of African high-qualified human resources are presently in diaspora. As a result, African countries rally in a high rate of international consulting for implementing donor funding projects. Like other immigrant groups, the African diaspora are involved in many activities which benefit their home country. This past June, during the World Cup in South Africa, I ever have a chance to meet with Dr. Mo Ibrahim. Dr. Ibrahim is from Sudan, but he was educated in Great Britain. He founded MSI, a consulting and software company which led developing into the funding of Celtel Mobile phone service in Africa. Today, he's a multi-billionaire. He has created the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which is committed to support the great African leadership that will improve the economy and social prospect of the African people. His foundation also supports the African academic in research projects and other knowledge productive pursuits. Someone I know quite well is Dr. Kes Lowell. Mr. Lowell was born in Ibadan, Nigeria, a city of 8 million people. Many years ago, he persuaded his parents to allow him to come to America to attend school. He graduated from college in Texas and went and received his MBA in finance and marketing. In 1989, Kes Lowell was giving a big boost when a newly seated Nigerian government indicated that he wanted to encourage his people to get more involved in the oil industry. One of the people that the government reached out was Mr. Lowell, the native son. Today, his company, Carmack, is the largest black-owned business in the world. And in fact, from oil exploration, refinery, and trading. Mr. Lowell-based case company ran almost $1.2 billion. Yes, $1 billion in revenue last year alone, which offices in London, Joburg, Lagos, and Cameroon. Produce and trade barrels of oil every second and every hour to every day. In 2003, he established a $1 million endowment at the University of Texas, Southern Texas, to develop International Business Development Center with the business school. I would also like to mention just here in Washington, the name of Dr. Francis Dixon and his wife, Violette Ebro. Dr. Dixon was born in Ghana and his wife, Dr. Ebro, was born in Kenya. Both was educated in the U.S. and he have found a way to help many Africans by performing invasive laparoscopy procedure to so many women in the African continent. In Africa today, as we all know, kidney disease is usually fatal because treatment for this chronic disease is almost non-existent. Dr. Violet Ebro is a nephrologist in Washington, and she continued to treat those who suffer from kidney disease in the continent of Africa. Both Dr. Dixon and his wife have traveled thousand miles every year, and recently they visited Biamba Marie Mutombo, the hospital that I built, to perform more surgery on women. In the Congo, my country of my birth, the infant mortality is almost 10%. Nearly 20% of newborn children died before their 5th birthday, and the average life expectancy is only 47 years old. Poor water condition, malnutrition, and malaria carrying mosquito are the most leading contributing of death in the Congo. As a doctors and nurses struggling to take care of sick and dying people with medicine equipment, medicine or life-saving help that they can need. In 1987, I arrived in this beautiful country of the United States of America to study medicine at Georgetown University. Although my career took a different path, but my commitment to improve the living condition in my homeland didn't. In 1997, I created the Dikembe Mutombo Foundation, which mission is dedicated to improve the health, education, and the quality of life for the people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. One of our major projects of the foundation was the construction of the $29 million hospital, a teaching hospital in the capital city of Kinshasa, which have contributed my own more than $23 million. The hospital opened in December 2007, and in 2 weeks from today, the Biamba Marie Mutombo will install the new state-of-the-art technology with the new CT scan of 64 slides, which does not exist in the Congo. This technology is among the few found in the continent of Africa. Africans in diaspora and those inside want to develop the continent and want to be part of the solution. The Biamba Marie Mutombo Hospital in DRC will have not been a success today without the contribution of my cousin, Dr. Louis Kanda, and his lovely wife, Mimi Kanda, who's here with us. I know them both personally, not because they are my relative, but they are also my closest advisor to the hospital. Dr. Louis Kanda was born in the Congo and received his medical training here in the United States. He's a permanent cardiovascular and heart surgeon at the Washington Hospital here in DC. His wife, Dr. Mireille Kanda, who's here this morning, was born in Haiti and also educated in the United States. She's a pediatrician by training and a senior medical advisor for the hospital. After completing their medical study in the U.S., Louis and Mireille Kanda went to DRC to work in one of the country's main hospitals, where they remained for several years before returning to the United States. Dr. Louis continued to give back to the continent of Africa by volunteering his service in Ethiopia every year, where he provided life-saving heart surgery to so many people there who cannot get help from the government. Dear friend, to sum up, I will encourage those who are not in diaspora to think about our beloved continent and to see for themselves how we can work together to eradicate poverty and diseases on the continent of Africa by 2015, which I still believe until today that we are not going to reach that goal because we're still falling behind to so many things. Thank you very much for your attention.
While the questions come up here, I will continue the theme of connecting the dots and ask Mr. Arman a quick question following up on what you said about the lack of understanding about what's going on in Somalia. Could you help us understand what the transitional federal government is doing to reach out, to broaden its support in constituency and to deliver services to those who are not involved in the insurgency and not supporting al-Shabaab, but are also not with you at this moment?
A very good question. Not a whole lot to brag about, and the reasons are very simple. To provide services requires resources. You cannot provide services without resources, and resources are not there. And until those resources are in place, there aren't a whole lot of things that the TFG can deliver.
So you're saying it's mostly a lack of resources?
Well, aside from the obvious, which is the insecurity,
Right.
Delivering the services would require resources, and that's the main hindrance to that. The commitment on the side of the TFG is there, and the insecurity everyone is aware of. So yeah, it boils down to the resources.
John Prendergast, we have a question for you. Someone is saying, we applaud the recent conflict minerals legislation, but we want to ask President Obama to implement Public Law 109456. Do you know what that is? I don't know. Okay. Let's just broaden the question. Let's just broaden the question on conflict minerals, because you pointed out that the legislation passed. I think it was in the Financial Reform Act.
Yes.
And you suggested that now is the time for additional action. I mean, the campaign, the need for public engagement is not over. So what are the steps that need to happen?
Thanks, Reed. I like the reorientation of that question because it's urgent. I just came back from Congo, from Eastern Congo, from the war zones, and what is happening, of course, is that now that the United States government is basically requiring the full transparency of the source, the minerals which are being sourced in Congo that go into our electronics products, it's created a fear on the part of Congolese, understandably and correctly, that the potential exists that many companies in the international marketplace will simply say, you know what, it's too hard to figure all this stuff out about Congo, let's just go and buy our minerals from somewhere else. So therefore, it becomes even more urgent for all that have been concerned so much about Congo's future to now go to the next step. Congress has taken its action, which is demanding transparency, but now the next step, which is this certification step, which I talked about with respect to blood diamonds. You know, it wasn't enough just to say 10 years ago, tell us where your diamonds are coming from. De Beers. It was the next step was taken by governments and corporations and civil society to create a system that weeded out the blood diamonds. It's not perfect. We're seeing that in Zimbabwe today, but at the time it was strong enough. The system was strong enough to certify those diamonds that are clean, that are not contributing to conflict, that it helped contribute to the end of wars in West Africa. So today's urgent step that's required is for countries to come together, particularly led by those countries in the region from which these minerals are coming, and work with countries where these minerals are going in the form of the products that we use every day, and come up with a certification scheme, learning the lessons from the blood diamonds Kimberley process, and coming up with a scheme that will. Now, what that does in 30 seconds is it changes the logic, the commercial logic from violent extraction, which you have now, because you make money if you can control areas militarily, if you can cow populations through rape as a war weapon into paying their taxes to you, to allowing the mining to continue, to move that commercial imperative away from violent extraction towards peaceful legal development. The money then goes into the coffers of the Congolese government to fund the kind of stuff that Dikembe and John are talking about, the kind of urgent development requirements in health and education and justice and all the other things that are the building blocks of a state, which presently, because of the mafia economy in Eastern Congo and the surrounding region, it isn't happening. So this is the opportunity that the United States Congress has created, but if it isn't moved on quickly, if it isn't built upon quickly, it could make matters worse. So the next step is for Secretary Clinton, for President Obama, for key leaders in our own government to take a leading role, just like the United States did 10 years ago in the blood diamonds, the Kimberley process, and help bring a solution to that very vexing problem.
Thanks. John MacArthur, a couple of questions I'll put together here for you. Amid massive challenges on resources, insecurity, explain to us a little bit more about how the Millennium Villages work, how you're able to promote rural development, and what kind of areas are you able to work in? I see here that you're in 10 countries in Africa, so could you just tell a little bit more about how that works and the conditions you have to deal with?
Right. Thank you. And I would say that the Millennium Villages project, just to be very direct for those who don't know about it, it's really taking the international agreements around the Millennium Development Goals and all the big promises that world leaders have made, the financial promises, the programmatic promises, and said, if you translate that into a community-based system to reach the places that are so disconnected, to help communities achieve the Millennium Development Goals and make the concept truly meaningful, within the resource envelope that everyone's promised. So we actually put in $60 per person per year worth of resources for agriculture, health, education, basic infrastructure, small business development. What does that look like? Through all local teams and local management and local partnership. We started this process, to be clear, not in the conflict zones, but in the places that were stable to begin with. Because one of the big paradoxes has been, although it's decreasing, it's that even in the places that are poor but totally stable, democratic, and very functioning, the international community hasn't been doing its part and certainly hasn't been following through on its commitments. So if you can't do it there, how could you possibly do it more broadly? That was the first concept. So through this local team and a local partnership strategy where we actually do a joint venture with the local government, the community and so forth, we bring half the resources. We have seen these great successes of, as I mentioned, tripling food production, tripling maize yields, 5-6-fold increases in access to drinking water, sanitation, major jumps in enrollment, school meals. You boost the food production, you can put school meals in the schools, and then enrollment jumps up. The integrated approach is very important because There's a story in the Washington Post today talking about how educating mothers is crucial and might be just as crucial as a health system for getting child mortality down, because all of these things are interconnected. Now, all that said, we've also been working in, as I mentioned, near Garissa and near the Somali area of Kenya, or in the Somali ethnic region of Kenya towards Somalia. Very different environment, pastoralist, and we've been asked and approached by many countries to do Millennium Village support, where countries and even companies operating in countries want to support community-based development. We're now about 4 years into this project, and so we've got the lessons to share. And even in DRC, I should say, there are major mining companies that are interested in making sure their footprint is a good one. And I think that's actually a big step forward, because if we can have these leadership groups create new norms of what success looks like, what responsible investment looks like, if we can have companies and governments take more of a cellular approach, what's often referred to as honeycombing, start with practical places and expand out, you can start to have what I see as very virtuous cycles of community psychology. Just as one quick example, I was in southwest Uganda, utterly disconnected place. No one lived there 50 years ago, the day they got bed nets. When they were distributing the bed nets, the great reaction in the community was not just the bed nets, but oh my gosh, bed nets are actually coming to each home. This is what a good government looks like to me. A very simple intervention can make a huge difference in mindsets around building trust and building faith in local institutions. And there's nothing more high impact than a bed net. And there are a lot of those things I think we could be thinking about in places that are more volatile too.
Thanks. Question for you, Mr. Mutombo. It has to do with fighting corruption in Africa. You've outlined for us some of the people in the diaspora who are playing a role, a constructive role. So to broaden that, is there a way that the diaspora can ally with people in Africa, civil society who are fighting corruption, to make the efforts that you're doing and that you cited more effective, to make aid and investment more effective, and to ensure that it reaches the people for whom it's intended?
Thank you, Mr. Crane, for the question. I believe that African people in diaspora need to make a great effort by going home to share their knowledge and their expertise to those who have been left at home, so they can understand what is happening, that the world is changing. This is one of the things that I do almost every day. As I call it, argue, discussing with my fellow Africans. How can we go back to the continent to make a change? Other people are coming, especially from Far East Asia, taking over Africa economically, politically, and almost on any corner that you can describe. But Africa themselves are now making a strong hold to say that, okay, we're going to try to find a way to develop our own continent. And it looks like we're still waiting for the world, the outside world, to come help us. And my challenge has been that we can be part of the solution. And we can go there a little bit, influence our leader, like I've been doing in the Congo. Most of the hospitals that existing in the Congo are really dysfunctional. The doctor come when they want to come, and the nurses are there when they want to come. Sometimes they take a 5 or 10 hours lunch break. They're just sitting outside, and while the patients are dying on the floor. And what we are trying to show that no, it cannot happen like this. If you work for a particular institution, you have to respect the rule of work, and you have to commit on yourself. And it's like a question is just changing the mind, and that's all African people need. And all of us, including especially the huge African American community in America, can certainly have a great influence to eradicate corruption in Africa. We can't just sitting down and continue to criticize African leaders for what they're doing. But more often as we go there, as John have said, more than the things can happen, as we see already in the east of Congo, in Uganda, in Sudan, and other places, because people like you have spoken. And we need more voices, and so we can stop corruption.
Thanks. We've got some more questions on Somalia, so we'll come back to that for put these together. With the continuing violence and conflict in your country, what would you like to see the United States do, both diplomatically, politically, and in terms of assistance? And how can the U.S. Can anyone ensure that the food that is given or the assistance that's provided can reach the, according to Oxfam here, 1.2 million people in urgent need of assistance? Better give you a mic.
Thank you. Again, good questions. As far as what can United States of America do, I guess rekindling that old relationship with Somalia would be one thing. Developing a policy towards Somalia that assertively engages the current TFG, that provides beyond just the vocal support. And that's not to undermine the assistance that the U.S. has been given. It has been indeed the most generous nation thus far. So, but still, the Somalia, compare that to the other dangerous countries such as Iraq, such as Afghanistan, there is no comparison. In this one, the highest, including the food aid, it's in the hundreds of millions. And the others, you talk about billions of dollars, 100 plus armed forces and so forth and so on, and it's still not destabilized. I mean, not stabilized. So that gives you an idea of the problem that we have in Somalia, a country where the system has completely failed. And if you want to understand what that means, think of Haiti. And think of Haiti extended for 20 years in that condition. And no one intervened. The first thing that the international community did in order even to distribute the food was to rebuild the infrastructure that makes that possible. The airports and all of that. And by the way, the TFG did that. So these are one of the services. In answer to your first question, I went directly and said nothing to brag about. But because the focus is primarily on that infrastructure that's needed. Establishing the radio to educate the people, expanding the port and the seaport and so forth and so on. Those were the things that they were doing. The second question was regarding to the food.
How to ensure delivery to the people in need.
Yeah, which I touched on it somewhat, but it's still security is essential. If you don't have security, you're not going to be able to deliver anything. I mean, just recently, Al-Shabaab ordered the World Food Program to stop serving in certain areas. And if they don't, their lives at risk. So security becomes essential. So what TFG has done so far is it has trained 10,000 army for the first time the country is now having a national army, so to speak. But the national army has only 50% of them are getting salary of $100 per month. Compare that to the AMISOM that receives $900 so far per month, which you can literally have trained at least 9 soldiers in the Somali side. I was just yesterday in the Security Council meeting, and most of the council members, that were presenting, they were making the case to increase the AMISOM and make it a pay that's equal to the United Nations peacekeepers. That's well and good. But what about the army that's ultimately going to ensure that peace, that's going to sustain that country and keep it peaceful? No one is making a case for them. So 50% of the army is paid, the other 50, they got the Kalashnikov, and they're angry. They're thinking either somebody took their money, or they have an enemy on the other side, and that's why you see them in different localities, skirmishes that kill few of them from each other. So,
Yes, further to your point on the contrast in resources and commitment to solving the conflict there, when I interviewed the outgoing UN envoy at the time, Old Abdullah, a few months back, he said, there's really a quite simple solution here. We need to move this UN operation that is massive in Nairobi to Mogadishu. We need a green zone. It wouldn't cost a lot in terms of what's being spent elsewhere, but there's no political will to do it. So it continues to operate from Nairobi, which is pretty ineffective. We have a question here, and I'd like to ask the special prosecutor if he would join us for a minute to help John. It's directed to you, this question, and John Prendergast. Can you come up and occupy Chairman Payne's seat for a moment? No one really can, but we have it. And it has to do with what further steps can be taken on Darfur, and specifically, you've outlined already the indictment, but I would ask you in terms of legal measures and political will, which you addressed, and John about mobilizing, again, public interest and support for this. What further steps could and should be taken to address what's going on in Darfur?
Sure. Legally, the court investigated crimes and have a warrant, so I can wait for a person in court. But the law is not just for prosecutors and judges, no? Diplomats have to be sure the law is respected in the negotiations. And in June 2008, 15 members of the Security Council, including China, Russia, Libya, Vietnam, and Indonesia, and US, and 9 others, insist that the Sudanese government has to arrest Ahmed Haroun. So that for me is the contradiction. The court issued a decision against Ahmed Haroun, the Security Council decided, African Union say nothing about Haroun, so it's no reason that UN or the members of the different national systems working with them interact with Ahmed Haroun. It's like they put Goebbels in charge of a hospital in New Jersey and say, it's okay, it's okay. No, it's not okay. Because that's for me the point. The point is, it's like a division. In the US, people think in the law for the court. But the main idea of the court is all of us know what we have to do. And that's the new idea we're trying to apply. Those who commit crimes against humanity or genocide out of the game. And that's, I think, what is needed. Those who are managing conflict, understanding, okay, what the court investigate, what the consequences. So I cannot talk to Mr. Haroun. Haroun has to go to jail. I cannot accept, because it's not a formality. Why Bashir keep using Haroun? Because it's his way to show that those who follow his orders are protected. It's like he's showing, I am the man here. Whatever they say, I don't care. I keep managing my country. So, and we have 15 countries who are really together, forcing Bashir to remove Haroun. Is the opposite signal. I'm not the man in the country. I cannot control the people. So no one will follow his orders. That's why Haroun is not a symbolic or legal issue. It's a critical issue for survival in the South. And so you ask me what to do, just apply the law, simple. But not just in the courtroom, in the life, so in the negotiations.
And that's the connection between Darfur and the north-south
Absolutely.
issue. Okay, John?
The big lie, I think, is that we have to somehow, for some reason, choose between justice and peace. And I think the view that you're hearing up here today is that sustainable peace is rooted in justice, and you cannot sacrifice one for the other. And I think there can be no sustainable peace in Darfur, and there will be no progress on peace in Darfur without some element of accountability. We called this a genocide. The Republicans and Democrats were united. The civil society groups around the world, the executive branch, the legislative branch. How in the world can you possibly think that once you use that, when you invoke that sacred convention and then not do anything about it, that there will be progress on the ground in Darfur? That is an extraordinary leap of faith that has no roots in reality. So as Luis says, we need to start somewhere, and the somewhere is Ahmed Haroun. There's a concrete example of accountability for war crimes that connects, as you just said, connects the South with Darfur. And then, secondly, in addition to the consequence of the commission of genocide, we need to learn the lessons of history in Sudan. And one of the great lessons of history in Sudan took place during the previous administration, which famously was not engaged in leading efforts at peace processes around the world, but because of very strong advocacy by conservative Christians and by the Congressional Black Caucus, President Bush became engaged, sent a special envoy to southern Sudan, who was a former senator, Jack Danforth, ordained minister, created a team of diplomats that went and helped the African-led peace process in Kenya negotiate what ended up being the peace deal secured in 2005 called the Comprehensive Peace Agreement that ended the second deadliest war in the world since World War II. It was an incredible accomplishment of peacemaking led from behind by the United States. The only thing I would say in addition to what the chief prosecutor is saying about accountability is let's replicate that effort. African leadership, U.S. heavy support, heavy diplomatic support, incentives and pressures just like we use in Iraq and Afghanistan and North Korea. Let's deploy real incentives and pressures. Let's build the international coalition that is aimed at securing peace in all of Sudan, in the South and in Darfur. Peace is possible. It was proven in 2005 by President Bush. Let's replicate it. And it couldn't be more urgent than right now, 4 months before the referendum.
One final comment.
Yeah, no, because following what John just said, it's a great idea to integrate efforts. You have Mbeki, who's very firm, working for African Union. So if you need to have a new special envoy, just support Mbeki, provide support to Mbeki, that will make a difference.
I think you can all agree this panel has done an extraordinary job of connecting the dots. Will you join me in thanking them as they leave and the next panel comes forward? Thank you all.